And as the announcement of the matric results for the 2021 class looms, the debate about the state of the South African education system continues. There are calls for the doing away with the 30% pass mark for some subjects, for changing of the curriculum to make it more Afrocentric, and concerns raised by an international survey which found that 3/4 of children aged 9 cannot read for meaning. So tonight we ask the question, does the South African education system need a complete architectural overhaul? To talk to us about this, I'm joined by NAPTOSA Executive Director Basil Manuel, One SA Movement Leader Mmusi Maimane, COSAS Secretary General Tebogo Magafane, and UNISA Lecturer in the Department of Development Studies, Dr. Richard Lehasa Molo. And you can be a part of this conversation tonight by sending us your questions and comments to 072-110-5584, or you can otherwise tweet us tonight at Newzroom 405. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you very much for your time joining us tonight here on In Focus. And let me state very clearly right here up front that we also did reach out to the Department of Basic Education to be a part of the panel tonight, but of course we've not received a response from them. So we will, of course, go ahead, and hopefully when they hear what we have to say, they might, of course, want to respond to it. But let's begin maybe by talking about what an education system is. Good enough to say, does it need an overhaul? But what are we actually talking about when we say we are talking of an education system? Basil, let me begin with
you. Good evening, and good evening to fellow South Africans. I just wanted to check just the nature of your question in terms of what are some of the nature of the education system. If I could respond to that up front. I think what's become important is that we need to align our educational outcomes to our economic needs. When South Africa talks about a developmental state, a term that I don't think is widely understood within the ruling party, actually, if you bring it into context, it is a state that is actively involved in the economic affairs of its country, directs its own markets, and decide what skills it needs towards that. And therefore, a great example of that is a country like South Korea and their investment in technology. Now, their education system is aligned to that, and they export and import skills that are aligned to those objectives. Now, when it comes to education system here in South Africa, you have to face up to two things. One, you are equipping young people to be equipped for an economy that is coming, which is operating in the fourth industrial revolution. And secondly, it is aligned to the economic needs of our country. I am going to say this upfront. Our education system is preparing young people for unemployability. It is preparing young people to end up in the streets to do nothing, because we are educating young people for a world that has passed. We're still operating in the industrial era economics output, and ultimately we have a government that doesn't have a plan. And the fruit is there for all to see. 3/4 of young people are unemployed. Ultimately, we have not aggressively introduced technology within the education sector as much as we could have. We failed to build infrastructure in schools, so you still end up with schools with pit latrines. And when you even look at the January 8th statement, it indicates the fact that the president hardly mentioned education, let alone gave a vision for it. So we are living in a country that desperately is crying out for change, and change in the way we educate our young people and the outcomes we are seeking.
I'm going to take you back to the 2019 proposed changes to the education system. But before that, Basil, hopefully you can hear me now. In simple terms, what comprises an education system?
First of all, when we look at education, we are looking at a system that must take youngsters from their mothers and take them through a process where they could become useful citizens. And when we talk about citizenry, we must remember that in the 21st century, things have changed faster in the last 10 years than they did in the previous 100 years. So if we are not seeing the dynamism in education and education being able to change with the changing times, we obviously fall behind. This is illustrated so clearly with the crisis that COVID brought. It highlighted the deficiencies within the system. It has highlighted how unprepared we were for the world of technology, as an example. But that is not the only thing. It is not the school's responsibility to ensure that we prepare everybody for a purpose-made job outside. Then where does choice come in? However, we must prepare them to be able to compete and to qualify themselves in a particular direction. But without the necessary tools like technology, we simply just won't be able to get our youngsters ready for that. And this is our dilemma now.
Yeah. Tebogo, let's bring you in here. I mean, if you incorporate public sector, if you incorporate private sector, if you incorporate various levels of our education system, community-based education, and so on and so forth, you look at the laws, you look at the policies, you look at the funding, and you look at the resource allocation. What comes to your mind as far as our education system and where it is right now? Have we done enough to transform this particular sector since 1994 to where we are?
Thank you very much, Mr. Tabo. Firstly, before I respond to you, I want to respond Mr. Mmusi Maimane. You know, we are tired as young people of loud healers. Mr. Mmusi, when he was still the face of DA, the imperialist, he was not saying anything. But today he comes here and wants to be popular and raise things that we've been raising as the organization. So Mr. Mmusi Maimane must just keep quiet and allowed to be led, because when he was used, he was never saying anything about the curriculum, because of that the curriculum benefited him as an imperialist. But it's okay, Mr. Tabo. Look, where we are now as the current generation that is leading learners, we've been crying about the system and the curriculum of this country. We said we need the curriculum that will speak about the status quo or the economy of this country. We are tired of the curriculum that it teaches us to be buyers, not to be producers. And also the issue of equality, that's the problem in our system. So firstly, we must deal with the issue of equality if we want to get our system okay and our curriculum okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Let's talk about that curriculum a little bit. In 2019, the Minister of Basic Education, and I will give you a chance to respond, Mmusi. I know you want to respond to that. I will give an opportunity to do that. Don't worry. Tebogo, I want to come back to you. Let's talk about the curriculum and the change in the curriculum. In 2019, Minister Motshekga saying the education system is turning a corner. One of the proposed changes was decolonized education. By that meaning that education through the teaching and the promotion of African languages, South African history, national symbols, to all learners up to grade 12, and a new compulsory change to the history curriculum. Did all these things actually happen, and are we beginning to see that degree of transformation in our curriculum?
No, and we're still worried about those things that they did not happen. That's why, as the organization, we said we need the curriculum of Africa. All African countries, they must have one curriculum. So maybe NG and DG, they will implement that resolution, because we have been speaking about that. So we don't know what's delaying them, but let's hope they will do what they're supposed to do. Thank you.
All right, Mmusi, are you willing to allow to be led on this particular matter?
No, I think, you know, Tabo, one of the crucial elements of this discussion is to enter it without insults and ultimately with a degree of respect. We are discussing the future of young people here. And I want to focus on that, because if I was to attend to Tebogo and what Tebogo and his organization have been working towards, I think that I would be failing the young people that he's describing, because frankly, we are talking about a government that has failed.
Yeah.
But I think I refuse to be led by this particular government, because he is contributing to the exact problem. He must answer the very basic questions, and I'm not going to trade insults. I must tell the young people who are now in the streets, 75% of them who cannot find work, what they are going to do. He must tell the 10-year-olds in this country, of which more than 70% of them cannot read for meaning, as to where the education system is working for them.
Yeah.
When they talk about curriculum review, he must express to me that why the Department of Education since 2014 has tabled this resolution, and yet a decade and yet years later, nothing has in fact happened.
Yeah.
So let's not trade in.
You were in the system yourself, in particular, up until a
Correct.
point. Tell me why, in your view, this has not happened. So, for example, government saying we aim to enroll South African children in a 2-year compulsory early childhood development program before starting grade 1. Why has this not happened?
Because there are a couple of things that are key. So the first we've got to eliminate is that it's not a question of money. When it comes to budget votes, education gets one of the higher. In fact, it might be the first or the second highest budget votes that gets allocated. So it's not money. The first is that, in fact, I think we must not deny the fact that the report tabled by Minister Motshekga herself, Jobs for Pals, indicated the fact that education had been captured by trade unions, of which the appointments of leaders in schools had been captured by trade unionism. That meant that we could not get the best teachers into the system. That's in the report, not me saying that. Second to this particular issue is that when you move away from the politicization of education, you have to deal with the efficacy of the Department of Education. So in all fairness, when it comes to primary school levels, it's become quite clear that even what's exacerbated, to Basil's point, it's been exacerbated by COVID, that in fact teaching and learning has not been taking place at primary school levels and at ECD centers. So you end up with young people who cannot read for meaning. And once you've got them at that point, you can't simply do much in second education and in tertiary education. So before we talk about the decolonization of education, we must recognize that we can't. Lastly, I've made the call for the removal of the 30% pass rate, because ultimately you get what you inspect. So what we are saying in this country is that our young people, for them to indicate proficiency, they must do it at 30%, which is perpetuating the historical injustices that were in fact in place in the system, and this government has failed to do anything.
Mmusi,
So
I'm going to get you and Basil to debate that one a little bit in a moment, because Basil has got other views on that 30% mark, and I'm going to come to you, Tebogo, as well in a moment. Let's take a break. 072-110-5584. Let me in on your views tonight. Does the South African education system require a complete architectural, overhaul? You can let us in on those views. Otherwise, tweet us at Newzroom 405. In Focus continues shortly. Hey, Dr. Richard, you are muted there. Please unmute for us.
Is it unmuted?
Yes, it's unmuted now. We can hear you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I apologize for these poor connections.
No problem. We'll come to you shortly.
Okay.
Welcome back. Live with us tonight on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, Channel 405. The conversation continues just about the beginning of it. Already things heating up here on a number of questions. One, of course, the biggest challenge that the education system is dealing with in South Africa is that question of quality. Of course, then further to that, we're talking about issues of decolonization, issues of early childhood development, and certain other issues that they're putting in place as far as the base or the level of assessment, which will be discussed further. Basil, let's bring you in here. One answer to those two questions. One, your view on the jobs for pals situation. One of the biggest challenges, a significant, shall I say, challenge facing the South African education education system or structure is the ongoing quest for improvement in the quality of education. Now you get the core that is the educators themselves, to a degree being victims of a, what would you say, an apartheid era education system. Have we gone past that moment to be able to improve the quality of the outcomes, but weigh in on this idea of jobs for pals, and therefore that, in a sense, delaying our progress? And then the assessment criteria.
Thabo, let's start with the fact that many of our teachers are teaching in suboptimal conditions. And when you look at the conditions that our people are working in, you've got to take for granted that they will not be able to do some of the things that you can do in conditions that are completely different. However, the job they are doing is stellar when you consider exactly how bad some of the conditions are. We very flippantly talk about infrastructure, but when you really look at it, where there are teachers teaching in schools where neither the learners nor the teachers even have ablutions, or the types of classrooms that when it rains, you can hardly teach. That's one of the big problems. But let me move on. Let me talk very briefly to the issue of the report. The report came out a long time ago, and we've seen, and it has been a criticism of government as a whole, about the appointment of pals to jobs, etc. And the bottom line is, we've made our point, we participated in the report, and we have seen nothing happening. Mmusi is correct, nothing has happened, notwithstanding the fact that the points have been made that there has been fiddling in the appointment of not only teachers, but even people in senior positions. But you get what you deserve. When you start appointing people without the requisite ability, it's not only qualification, it's ability. Then, of course, what can you expect out of a system? So we are beset with problems because, if truth be told, there are people that should not be in the positions they are in because the vision is simply just lacking to take us forward. We are sitting with a curriculum that is clearly outdated. That curriculum should have been changing long before we got to the crisis of COVID, long before we started reaching out for technologies to continue teaching. Now, if we had the vision, we would be doing that. Look, you can even come to the present. We would have been addressing the attendance at school earlier had we had the people who could take the debate further and not wait for other actions to happen around them. I don't agree with Mmusi about the 30%. I'm on record as saying, and I will repeat it, that I think it's a storm in a teacup. But worse still, it detracts us from the real problem that is there. I don't believe, if you look at the record and look at the report from the 2020, from 2019 and so on, of just the matriculants, and you will look very carefully and you will see that the number of children that have actually benefited from that 30% pass is negligible. Besides, you can't get 30% and get through matric. It is to assist the child, for example, that is a high flyer, but fails their first additional language like Afrikaans. And if that child had to fail, many of them would not get any further. However, I don't believe that the purpose is fully understood throughout. And as a result, we didn't fully enter into the debate because it is distracting from the bigger issues that we have. The issues of technology, the issues of vision, the issues of changing the curriculum and not simply throwing out the good and replacing with a new thing of the same ilk as we've had before. Right. We need a complete overhaul, but of the right type.
Let's bring in now Dr. Richard Lehasa to this conversation. It's been, of course, a little bit of a testing time technologically to try and connect, but we appreciate you coming on. Over the years, Dr. Richard, the government has been, of course, putting in place a wide range of policies, many of which are preoccupied with this challenge that we have in improving the quality of our education. Have these policies in place in our education system been enough to transform this sector and move us into a particular trajectory that speaks to our economic needs in the country?
I think it is important, first of all, my dear brother, that we understand the kind of the dilemma that we are in. As much as the policies can be there, there must be a will, a political will to be able to implement a change. But I can tell you one thing, that far beyond the fact that we are dealing with the policy issue, who, if we are talking in the context of the decolonized education, who must bring such an approach to an education are the teachers who must actually introduce that educational approach, decolonized themselves. And I think what I'm trying to think about is the pace at which our government has actually worked at shocks me. We are almost moving towards 30 years now in South Africa that we have been voting. If you look between 1948 to 1953, it took apartheid to introduce Bantu education because of political will and commitment. And I feel that since from 1994 to date, it is now 2022, we're still not sure in terms of what kind of a content and the kind of the society that we are basically trying to build. So I'm saying the challenge that we're actually dealing with is whether we deal with elementary education, whether we move to the tertiary education. The policies may be perfect, they may be there, that we need a certain kind of a change. But I feel that there are forces of intransigence within the very corridors of the universities themselves to apply their minds. I remember at UNISA when we started the whole debate on towards the African university, we had professors who were asking questions about, are we not in Africa? They could not actually understand the fact that education has been a political tool of recloning the minds. So we need to now travel miles back to uncross the minds that were crossed. So yes, as much as the policies are there, I do believe that in these institutions of learning themselves, there is a need of introspection. But I'm glad at the same time, I won't be a prophet of doom, that there has been a great initiative where the buzzword of decolonizing education, re-Africanizing education has actually come. And I do believe that once we confront the content of the very courses that we are teaching by focusing on issues of identity, I believe that we can see a change. So
I'll come back to that in a moment and get a sense of where it stopped. But Tebogo, let's bring you in then, a question being put. That report on jobs for pals, what did COSAS do with that report?
Thanks, Mr. Tawagain. Firstly, let me respond, Mr. Mmusi, before I come to you. I don't make noise with the T-boys. He knows that he was working for somebody who was not genuine to our people. So, Mr. Maimane, I don't want to argue with you. I'll argue with your handlers, but it's okay. Look, Mr. Chabo, we have spoke to Department of Education about that report. And as the leader of NAPTOSA has alluded, we might go, we are going somewhere in the country, but we don't need noisemakers. We need everybody. We need everybody to support so that we can implement whatever we want to implement as the country. Because if we want to play politics with the education of an African child, all of us were a problem. Because remember, here we're dealing with the system. So what do we do as the country to deal with the system? Than us coming here and arguing and arguing. We need to implement. You see, and also we have raised one issue with the minister, that the minister must take powers from unions by appointing principals and HODs, because of sometimes they do employ or deploy people who are not competent. So we need to change that route. The DG must appoint. Thank you very much.
All right. Basil, powers must be removed from the unions and DGs must be the one who appoint?
Let me just correct Tebogo. Remember, unions don't appoint. Yes, they may influence, and let's not delude ourselves that happens. But the power lies with parents. We need to be assisting our parents, and of course, all our organizations need to be assisting our parents so that they are not unduly influenced and incorrectly influencing the appointment process. They make the nominations, and of course appointments are then made through the department. But no, we will oppose the movement of appointments to an individual in a group that you have already alluded to may be filled with a whole lot of deployees. How then does that become a better system? That would be defeatist for an organization like NAPTOSA.
Let's take a break. When we continue in a moment, we'll get your views. 072-110-5584. Tweet us at Newzroom 405. I still want to go back to Dr. Richard to talk about what does a decolonized education system actually look like? Does it stop at just teaching indigenous languages and changing the history curriculum? How far does it go? Does the South African education system require a complete architectural overhaul? That's the question tonight. Let's hear your views at Newzroom 405 or on 072-110-5584. In Focus continues shortly. Welcome back live here on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. The conversation tonight around the architectural design of our education system and the reforms that are required in our quest for the improvement of the quality of the outcomes, the improvement of the quality of the education itself, and of course what it does for our economy. We are in conversation with Basil, Manuel, Mmusi Maimane, Dr. Richard Lehasa Molo. We also had Tebogo Magafane in a moment, but because of some challenges with the connection, now we seem to have lost him. We'll try and see if we can establish that connection, but the conversation continues in the meantime. Let's talk, Mmusi, about some of the issues that Tebogo is raising around resource allocation. How we determine where the money will go. I know you said, let us not make a mistake. Money is there. Education, one of the highest budgeted for item in the country. But how do we determine where it goes and whether that is an effective way, indeed, of determining where the resources should be allocated?
Yeah. I think I would hate to make comments about Tebogo if he's not here, because I'm not certain he's fit to be handling the particular debate we're having. But suffice to say, let me just highlight a couple of things. I want to get back to Professor Moloi's comment. A school is but merely a reflection of the society and the society you seek to envision. And therefore, well within that context, I want to say that societally we've lost the basic value of Ubuntu. And this is how I want to enter the discussion about the decolonization of education. We need to re-entrench values of Ubuntu and then ask ourselves, what are its implications in terms of math science, in terms of accounting, etc., so that you can then shape and develop curriculum consistent to the values you want to see in society. This is not a foreign concept in that if you look at Nordic countries specifically, they've been able to craft their education system around a similar philosophy which derives itself from the German word Bildung, which ultimately architecture of education is around that. And there are a number of institutions in this country that are already starting to implement that and achieving a different set of results. So I think, firstly, we need to talk about values. Then we need to talk about vision and align those two things so that society can ultimately attend to the education question. When you talk about resourcing, what has become quite clear is that when you then unpack the Department of Basic Education's actual budget itself, we need to extrapolate how much of it is spent on infrastructure, how much of it is spent on consultants, and how much is actually spent on remunerating the right task to duty. And I would argue the case that we need a different form of remunerating of some of our teachers, because the best ones, particularly in subjects like maths and science, I don't think we can retain the best talent because we are under-rewarding them. So we need to think about that question as a society. Secondly, I think when it's long overdue when we think about this issue of infrastructure build. Mr. Mzuli, I don't understand why today, in 2022, so many years into our democracy, a child must still be using a pit latrine, and even further, an educator must be still doing the same. I think that we are effectively perpetuating the fact that the resources or the nature of your birth and the resources that you have will determine the education you seek to get. And I would argue that, in fact, there are two interventions I'd like to propose. Firstly, so I think the competence of the leader, when you appoint a Minister of Education, I think the presidents need to apply themselves to the constitutional provision that says, should someone from the Ministry of Education be someone that they choose from their own internal caucus, or could they be able to attract a particular skill for that time, given that the Constitution allows for 3 appointments to come into play? That's the first thing. The second thing is, education, as I said earlier, is an ecosystem. Parents, teachers, they all form part of the community. How do we ensure that we strengthen that relationship so that ultimately, starting at early childhood development centers, because the failure of early childhood development centers has achieved the fact that our kids cannot read for meaning. Yeah. So ultimately, we need to strengthen those use of parent partnership so that at a primary school level, we can set our kids for a future level.
In simple terms, are you saying the Minister of Education is not competent to lead this particular aspect of our education system?
Well, I think she's led, and maybe by COSAS, and led by unions. She herself is not leading. And as we've seen from the representative of COSAS, heck, if she's been led by those ones, we're in deeper trouble. So I would argue the fact that no, she's not fit for the job, and ultimately we need someone who can be able to achieve that vision. I loved what Professor said earlier. Said, what the apartheid government, right, as abhorrent as that system was, they had a vision for what kind of education system they wanted to get and implemented it. What is the vision for this government, and how are they implementing it?
A quick one. Touch on the issue that Basil raises. Says it's a storm in a teacup. Beneficiaries of the 30% pass mark are negligible in the broader scheme of things.
It's incorrect to say so because, Basil, I want to point you out to the fact that when you look at it in real numbers, so let's take a subject like maths. So in mathematics, and I want to say why this is important. It would be like going to a doctor who says to you, I'm going to give you a prick test to measure out what the level of your sugar level is. And then when it comes up with a particular reading, you say, don't obsess about that number. But it tells me a lot. It tells you about what you're eating. It tells you about your sugar levels. And what I'm saying to you is simply this. When you look at mathematics pass rate since 2016, at 30%, over 51% of our kids passed at 30%. And when you look at 2020, that figure was 53%. If we increase the pass rate in mathematics to just over 50% as an argument, let's take maths as a core competence of our country, then our pass rate actually means that those who passed at 50% in 2020 were only 22%. Now you must tell me that are we going to build an economy where only 22% of our kids are passing mathematics at 50% so that we can compete with the future? So it's not just an obsession with a number. It's actually an indicator of a broader systemic problem. And I can take you subject by subject. And then we move on to accounting, we move on to STEM subjects. But here's the even broader problem that I'm trying to indicate here. That when you do the cumulative assessment and the tabling of matric results, if you have a base rate of 30, we all stand up as we will on Thursday to say, here's the pass rate. Others are speculating we might have a 10% drop. I don't want to hypothesize on that. But for sure, it will be above 65%. And then we can say 65% of our kids pass. But actually, when you narrow down what is in fact happening, you will discover very quickly that that number is actually much lower in real numbers.
Dr. Richard, does the decolonization of our education stop at, getting indigenous languages being taught and maybe overhauling our history curriculum and introducing some new topics into that particular subject?
I would like to say that the people without a knowledge of themselves live as the residues, live as the imps and the imitators. An education that does not teach people to understand themselves within the context of their history and their culture with assertion of their own agency. It is a miseducation project. And I want to say that there are 3 key areas within the decolonial reflections that we are seeking to push in education. we decolonize the powers that be, we unmask the hegemonic systems that are at work. And with the fact that we have not really dismantled apartheid, in fact, we are not in a post-apartheid, we are in a neo-apartheid phase, which is apartheid through other means. We, secondly, decolonize epistemology, which is knowledge itself. Who produces that knowledge? And what does that knowledge actually seek to achieve? The kind of a people, and how do we want them to think? And then we decolonize the body, the ontology. We understand that the slavery project not only captured the mind, but it also captured the body. So what we are then saying is that when African people begin to reaffirm themselves and believe even in their names, and believe that they are created also in the image of their God, and they have a right to be, knowledge of self is a starting point, my dear brother. And I do believe that at the moment we start there will definitely be a change. At the present moment, we continue to have a kind of an education system that uses us in the project of Euro-North American hegemonic system. But I do believe that when we come back to ourselves, when we reclaim our own history, we affirm the relevance and significance of our cultures, we take power from that very point. So I do believe that that's what we need. We need to be careful in terms of the kind of the content that we are teaching. In this case, I'm not just merely about production of certificates with people who are psychologically dislocated to start in another place other than themselves. There are many people who don't even understand that the first human civilization begins right in Kemet. And as a result of that, we have eyes that are looking towards Europe for assistance. But once we relocate those minds through transformative and liberative education, it was Stephen Bantu Biko who said that the mind of the oppressed remains a weapon that the master uses. And so when Ngugi wa Thiong'o emphasized that we must decolonize the mind has been cloned and has been wounded. And I do believe that this is where we must really begin to look at it seriously.
Basil, let's weigh in then on a number of issues there that have been raised. One is an education system that under rewards, particularly if you look at the STEM category of teachers, those who are well talented and able to give us the kind of outcomes that we desire. Let's start there.
Thanks, Thabo. First of all, let me just say, don't forget that our education system is by and large an academic one. And if we follow Mmusi's trend, we would then condemn thousands of children to failure. What needs to change is the makeup of our education system as well. But insofar as rewards are concerned, we've debated this ad nauseum. But one of the biggest problems lies in the very thing that was mentioned early on, and again by Mmusi. When you look at the accusations of corrupt appointments and you look at all those things, how then do you get to a point where you reward at a higher level certain groups of people within the system? It is a minefield. And yes, we even tried saying, let us reward people for going to the rural areas, particularly those that are teaching certain subjects that could change the curriculum of what was the traditional rural black school curriculum of having a very basic makeup. And even now that has fallen down because it is not being implemented evenly. And I want to agree, we've got to look at an incentive system. We've got to look at promoting certain subjects. We've got to look at the 21st century technologies, which are essential if we want to change the trajectory of our education system. But we can't base it on a system that is in itself fraught with problems. We've got to be far more creative, and we've got to put our heads together for this. There's no one easy answer. And yes, even pass marks must be addressed at some stage, but you can't address it in a vacuum. You can't address it without looking at all the other things. And one of the inherent problems of the education system has been the silo effect. where some people are talking about decolonization and the others are running in a completely different direction, who will not even want to consider the discussions that Dr. Malloy, Professor Malloy is even talking about. And that is the problem. There doesn't appear to be a single idea where we are pushing one big thought with many components running in the same direction. And that is where the breakdown comes. Even when we talk about ECD and why it has taken so long, it has been in paper after paper, and only now we are talking about the incorporation. Why do these things take so long? They take so long because we are working in silos primarily.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we see Tebogo is back with us, which is great, and we'll have him weigh in on some of the issues that are being raised here. Basil, Manuel, Mmusi Maimane, Dr. Richard Lehasa Molo still with us, and Tebogo Magafane coming through. And we're going to your messages coming through on 072-110-5584, otherwise on Twitter at Newzroom405. Stay with us. Welcome back. Do you believe the education system in South Africa is turning a corner with the number of policy changes in place and various implementations, or at least start-stop implementation of the various models? What are your thoughts tonight? 072-110-5584. We have Basil, Manuel, Mmusi Maimane, Tebogo Magafane, and Dr. Richard Lehasa Molo, and we'll come to your messages in a moment. Tebogo, let's bring you back then into the conversation. I know how much of it you were able to catch and what you've missed, but let me put a direct question to you. Do you believe that the current Minister of Education is the correct leader, competent enough to direct this education system to where it needs to go?
You know, if she was not, if she was appointed, meaning she's good, according to his organization, meaning ANC. So who I am to judge? But for us to have a correct system, we need everybody. We need all African countries. Hence, I'm saying that we need the system of Africa. Look, Mr. Thabo, we must not make a lot of noise. We want to say, before apartheid, how many people wrote matric, and now after apartheid, we need to check numbers. Where the current government is doing good, we need to applaud. But we have some opportunistic people in this interview whom want to take the opportunistic stand and make a lot of noise. Than us making a lot of noise, let's put our politics aside and come up with solutions as the country. Because our country needs all of us to come together and say, we need one Africa. We need one African system. Look,
are you happy though? Before you move from that, I'm going to give you a chance to move from that point in a moment. But before you move from that point, are you happy with the quality of those matriculants? You're saying we must now look at how many more people are going through matric now compared to the times of apartheid. Are you happy with the quality of those matrics who are going through that system?
Look, if we can produce engineers, I'm happy. If we can produce engineers as the country from the current government, I'm happy. Who am I to judge?
Yeah.
You see,
who
am I to judge?
But so yet in the same vein, Tebogo, you say no. But I'm saying yet in the same vein, you say, but we must decolonize this education. But you are happy that it produces engineers, but you still want to decolonize it.
Look, Mr. Thabo, I'm saying that I'm happy because during apartheid, most of our people did not receive certificates, or they did not go through matric. So now we need to appreciate the good that our government is doing. Hence, I'm saying that we must not criticize only. We need to be happy with what our government is doing. But hence I was saying to you, Mr. Thabo, let's go back during apartheid and now. Even though as the organization was saying, no, we need transformation of this system or curriculum, because of we are tired to be buyers. We must be producers. Hence, I was saying to you, I was counting certain countries, your Lesotho, Botswana. Check how many people whom are fixing cars in this country.
Mm. So what kind of new subjects would you as COSAS want to see introduced? President Cyril Ramaphosa pledged to introduce a number of technology-focused subjects. In April 2019, he spoke of issues like coding, issues like robotics being introduced into the